I dragged my suitcase into the quiet hallway, expecting to surprise my husband for Christmas. Instead, I heard his voice drift from the kitchen, cold and sharp. "She is pregnant with my son," he told his mother. I froze. Marla did not gasp. She laughed. Good. Right on timeline. Standing there, I realized this was not just an affair. It was a carefully calculated heist, and my life was the vault they had just cracked open. My name is Megan Caldwell, and at 33 years old, I thought I knew exactly what my life was worth. I had dragged my suitcase up the driveway 2 days earlier than planned, my breath puffing out in white clouds against the biting Midwest winter air. I had taken an earlier flight, skipped the final conference mixer, and rushed home to surprise my husband. The house stood imposing and silent in the gray afternoon light, the wreath on the door looking festive and welcoming. I turned the key in the lock with the softest click possible, imagining the look on Evan's face when I walked into the room. The foyer was warm, smelling of cinnamon and expensive pine. I left my shoes by the door and moved across the hardwood in my socks, avoiding the third plank from the left because I knew it groaned under weight. I wanted this to be a perfect moment. I wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him I was home. But the house was too quiet. It held a heavy, suffocating silence that felt wrong for a holiday afternoon. Then I heard voices drifting from the kitchen. It was Evan, my husband, and Marla, his mother. They were not laughing or shouting. They were speaking in the low, clipped tones of people conducting a business transaction. I stopped just outside the kitchen archway, hidden by the shadow of the dining room hutch. "She is pregnant with my son," Evan said. His voice was flat. There was no joy in it, no panic, just a statement of fact. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp, my heart hammering a violent rhythm against my ribs. I waited for Marla to scream, to scold him, to ask how he could do this to his wife. Instead, I heard the clink of a teaspoon against china. "Good," Marla said, her voice smooth and cold. "That is excellent news. It fits the timeline perfectly. Just do not let Megan suspect anything yet." I did not barge in. I did not scream. Something in my brain, perhaps the part of me that worked as a forensic compliance analyst, slammed a steel door shut over my emotions. I was no longer a wife coming home for Christmas. I was an observer at a crime scene. My hand, shaking uncontrollably, reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I swiped to the voice recorder and pressed the red button. "I am worried about the papers," Evan said, his voice dropping lower. "If she reads the fine print—" "She won't." Marla cut him off. "Megan trusts you. She is desperate to be the good wife. When she signs, everything shifts. The debt, the contracts, and the moral failure. It all becomes her burden." I pressed the phone tighter against my chest. "The warehouse on 4th Street, Marla continued. "The lease is already under the guarantee she provided, or the guarantee we provided for her. Once the default hits in January, the liability is hers. You will be free. Evan, you and the mother of your child." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never signed a guarantee for a warehouse. I had never even heard of a warehouse on 4th Street. This was not just infidelity. This was financial murder. They were framing me. "It feels risky," Evan said. "Maybe we should wait until after the holidays." "No," Marla snapped. "Christmas is when she is weakest. She is sentimental. She wants peace. Use that. Tell her it is for your future together. She will sign anything to keep you happy right now. She will sign, simply to be done with it." "Okay," Evan sighed, the sound of a man resigning himself to a necessary evil. "I will do it tonight." I had heard enough. I lowered the phone and saved the recording. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I backed away, step by silent step, retreating through the dining room and into the hallway. I grabbed my suitcase and carried it up the stairs, my muscles screaming with the effort to be silent. Inside our bedroom, the sight that greeted me made my stomach turn. I had spent weeks decorating this room. There were garlands on the headboard and a small, perfectly decorated tree in the corner with gifts wrapped in silver paper underneath. I looked at those gifts: an expensive watch for Evan, a cashmere scarf for Marla. I had bought them with love. Now, they looked like props on a stage set for a tragedy. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blinking light of the smoke detector on the ceiling. I wanted to curl into a ball. I wanted to weep until my throat was raw, but Marla's voice echoed in my head. She is weak. She is sentimental. I stood up and walked to the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were dry. I will not cry, I whispered to the reflection, my voice barely audible. I will not shed a single tear for them. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I was the victim in their story. But they had forgotten what I did for a living. I hunted liars. I found the truth buried under mountains of paper. I wiped an invisible speck of dust from my blazer. If they wanted me to sign my life away, I would pick up the pen. But they had no idea what I was going to write. To the outside world, I am just a woman with a boring desk job. At Grey Ridge Ethics and Audit, my official title is Forensic Compliance Analyst. I spend 40 hours a week tracking digital footprints, analyzing server logs, and sniffing out the faint copper scent of deceit in corporate ledgers. It is a dry profession to most people, but to me, it is a native language. I did not learn these skills in a classroom. I learned them in the foster care system of the Midwest. When you grow up in a house that is not yours, with people who are paid to keep you, you develop a second set of senses. You learn to interpret the weight of a footstep in the hallway. You learn that a sudden drop in volume behind a closed door is far more dangerous than a scream. You learn to hear the truth hiding in the gaps between the lies. That was why Evan had been such a devastating blind spot. I met him 5 years ago at a community food drive. He was handing out frozen turkeys, smiling with a warmth that felt like a fireplace in a blizzard. He seemed so simple, so kind. He made me want to lay down the shield I had carried since I was 6 years old. He made me believe that I could stop analyzing and just live. But the shift happened slowly, almost imperceptibly. After the wedding, Evan started picking at the edges of who I was. He began to frame my competence as a character flaw. You are always so clinical. Megan, he would say when I asked about a strange charge on the credit card statement. Can't you just be a wife for once? You make me feel so small with your constant questions. So I stopped asking. I tried to be softer. I tried to be the woman he wanted, the one who didn't look too closely at the cracks. Then there was Marla. To the neighbors and the church committee, she was the saintly matriarch, the widow who held her family together with grace. To me, she was a sniper who never missed. She never raised her voice. She just smiled that thin, porcelain smile and inserted needles into my insecurities. Oh, let Megan handle the utility bills, she would say at Sunday dinner, waving her hand dismissively. She is so good with paperwork. She wouldn't understand the complexities of the investment portfolio anyway. Those are big picture things. Dear, it was a systematic erosion of my confidence. They made me feel lucky just to be included in their world. I remembered the stack of papers I signed before the wedding. It was a prenuptial agreement thick enough to be a novel. I had hesitated, my pen hovering over the signature line, my gut twisting. But Evan had held my hand, his thumb rubbing my knuckles in a rhythm that felt like safety. It is just a formality. Honey, he had whispered, looking deep into my eyes. My mom needs it to feel secure about the family trust. It means nothing to us. Do you trust me? I wanted to prove I wasn't like the people I grew up with. I wanted to prove I wasn't after his money. So I signed. For the last 2 weeks. I thought we were getting back to that initial magic. Evan had been unusually attentive. He brought me coffee in bed every morning. He sent 24 red roses to my office. He kept talking about a fresh start for the new year, holding me a little tighter at night. "We are going to be happy. Megan," he had said just yesterday, "I promise. Everything is going to change." Now, standing in the silence of our bedroom, I realized that the flowers and the coffee were not acts of love. They were the anesthetic administered before surgery. The fresh start was not for us. It was for him and the woman carrying his child. The conversation in the kitchen was not a slip of the tongue. It was the third act of a script they had been writing since the day I signed my name on that legal document. They didn't just want to leave me. They wanted to erase me. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence of the house pressing against my ears. My hands were no longer shaking. A cold, familiar clarity had settled over me. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over a notification I had dismissed 2 days ago. It was a one-time password for my life insurance portal, sent at 3:14 in the morning. When I had asked Evan about it over breakfast, he had laughed it off while pouring coffee. "It is just a system glitch, babe," he had said, kissing my temple. Ignore it. I did not ignore it now. I logged into the portal. The password had been changed 5 hours after that code was sent. I backed out and opened my banking application. My eyes scanned the profile settings until I found the mailing address. It was no longer our home address on Maple Avenue. It had been updated to a location I did not recognize, 1409 Industrial Way. The warehouse. The place Marla had mentioned in the kitchen. I switched to my email, ignoring the inbox and going straight to the trash folder. There it was. A confirmation email from the credit card company titled Paperless Billing. Confirmed. It was dated yesterday. They were turning off the paper trail. They were making sure that when the bills for their secret debts arrived, I would never see the envelopes. I did not storm downstairs to scream at Evan. That is what a wife would do. I was not a wife right now. I was an analyst. I opened my laptop and created a new spreadsheet. I labeled the columns with mechanical precision. Date, activity, evidence, source. This was how I survived in the foster system, and this was how I kept my job. You do not argue with liars. You document them. I logged into the shared document cloud we used for tax purposes. I searched for recent uploads. Buried inside a folder named Old Receipts was a PDF file created just last week. I opened it. The title read, Commercial Lease Guarantor Addendum. My eyes scanned the bottom of the page. There was my signature. It was a digital signature, but it looked terrifyingly authentic. It had the slight loop on the capital M that I always made. I right-clicked the file and opened the Properties tab to view the metadata. I needed to know when this crime had happened. The creation timestamp read December 12th at 2:30 in the afternoon. My breath hitched. December 12th. You have been working so hard. Megan. Evan had told me that morning, handing me a gift card. I booked you a full package at the Serenity Spa, a total digital detox. Leave your phone in the locker and just relax. He had not been being kind. He had been creating a window of opportunity. He knew exactly where I was at 2:30. I was in a mud bath, completely cut off from the world, while he was using my digital identity to sign away my financial future. I looked closer at the metadata. The location tag was still embedded in the file. I copied the IP address and ran a quick trace tool I used for work. If Evan had signed this from home, it would show our residential provider, but the screen flashed a different result. The IP address belonged to a corporate server, Rourke Freight. He had done it from his office. He had sat at his desk, likely messaging me about how much he loved me, while he framed me for a lease that would bankrupt me. I felt a surge of nausea, but I swallowed it down. I took screenshots of everything: the IP trace, the timestamp, the signature, the bank address change. I compiled the files into an encrypted folder and emailed it to a secure, private account I had created years ago for whistleblower tips, an account neither Evan nor Marla knew existed. I was building a chain of custody. If this went to court, I would be the one holding the smoking gun. I put my earbuds back in and pressed play on the recording from the kitchen one last time. I needed to hear the rest. Remember the stewardship clause in the divorce papers. Marla's voice hissed through the speaker. It is vague enough. Once the debt hits, we argue she is financially incompetent. The clause will lock her assets under a court-appointed trustee. It will lock her. I took the earbuds out. They weren't just trying to steal money. They were trying to use the legal system to declare me unfit to manage my own life. They wanted to put me in a cage built of my own assets. I closed the laptop. I had the evidence. Now I just had to survive the holidays without letting them see the knife I was hiding behind my back. The morning light in the Motel 6 was gray and unforgiving, filtering through curtains that smelled of stale cigarettes. I had slipped out of the house the previous evening while Evan and Marla were still congratulating each other in the kitchen, terrified that my breathing would give me away. Now, my phone buzzed on the cheap laminate nightstand. It was Evan. When are you landing? Babe, miss you. I stared at the screen. The Christmas tree emoji felt like a slap. It was the casual brutality of it that made my stomach turn the ability to send a digital kiss while actively plotting to destroy the person receiving it. To him. I was still in the air, a clueless wife flying home to her slaughter. To me, he was no longer my husband. He was a subject of investigation. My work phone rang, jarring me from the thought. It was Sarah from Human Resources at Grey Ridge. Megan, I have a weird one, Sarah said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. We just got a call from an external investigator. They wanted to verify your employment dates and asked if you had ever been flagged for data mishandling. My blood ran cold. This was the second pincer of the attack. They were not just going after my bank account. They were planting seeds to destroy my professional credibility. If I was flagged for data theft, my testimony as a forensic auditor in any future court case would be worthless. They were disarming me before the battle even started. Who called? Sarah, I asked, keeping my voice steady, though my hand gripped the phone tight enough to hurt. They didn't leave a firm name. Just said it was a standard background check for a credit application. Did you apply for a loan? No, I said. I did not. Log the call. Sarah, please, write down the exact time. I hung up and immediately opened my laptop. I logged into the Grey Ridge network using my administrative override. I queried the access logs for my own user credentials. The screen filled with lines of code. There were 4 logins in the last 48 hours. 2 of them were mine. The other 2 were time-stamped at 3 in the morning and 4:15 in the morning, originating from a device I did not recognize. How did they get in? I had 2-factor authentication. I had a physical security token, a small gray USB stick that generated a rolling encryption code every 60 seconds. Without it, my password was useless. I grabbed my purse and dumped the contents onto the motel bedspread. Keys clattered against the fabric. I grabbed my key ring. The house key was there. The car fob was there. The leather tassel Evan bought me for our anniversary was there. The gray USB token was gone. I closed my eyes and the memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks ago, Sunday morning, Evan had been rushing out the door to meet a client. Honey, I need to move your car to get the mower out, he had shouted from the hallway. Where are your keys? I had pointed to my bag on the counter. He had rummaged in there for a long time. Too long just to grab a set of keys. He must have slid the token off the split ring right then. He had been planning this for weeks. He had stolen my access to frame me for a crime I hadn't committed yet. I turned back to the laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. I needed to see the legal framework of their trap. I pulled up the scanned copy of our prenuptial agreement from the cloud. I searched for the phrase Marla had hissed in the kitchen, stewardship. I found it on page 42, buried in a section about incapacitation, in the event of mental distress or financial mismanagement caused by undisclosed liabilities. Management of assets shall revert to third-party stewardship. It was a conservatorship clause wrapped in fancy legal jargon. And then, in the folder of documents I had intercepted yesterday, I found the draft of the divorce settlement they planned to hand me. Attached to it was an addendum titled Release of Future Claims. It stated that upon signing, I waived the right to sue for any prior financial actions taken during the marriage. If I signed this to get a quick divorce, I would be legally absolving them of the fraud they were currently committing in my name. They wanted me to play the role of the heartbroken wife who just wanted out. They wanted me to sign quickly to escape the pain. I picked up my phone and opened Evan's text message. I forced my breathing to slow down. I typed my reply. Flight just landed. Baggage claim is a nightmare. See you in an hour. Love you. I hit send. Then I went to work. I took the hard drive containing the logs, the IP traces, and the audio recording. I encrypted it with a 20-character password. I uploaded a copy to a secure server in Switzerland. I put another copy on a micro SD card and taped it to the inside of my powder compact. I printed the key documents and slid them under the lining of my suitcase. I was going home. I was going to walk into that house, kiss the man who stole my identity, and smile at the mother who wanted to imprison me. I would let them think they were winning, because the only way to catch a thief this careful is to let him think the vault is unlocked. The evening of December 24th arrived wrapped in a coat of freezing rain. We were seated at a corner table in the Golden Pheasant, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Milwaukee, a place where the chandeliers were crystal and the silence was heavy with old money. I sat in my high-necked black dress, playing the role of the unsuspecting wife to perfection. My hands were folded in my lap, resting on a napkin that cost more than my weekly grocery budget growing up. Marla was seated to my right, vibrating with a manic sort of energy. She kept touching my arm, her nails digging slightly into my skin through the fabric of my sleeve. "You look so pale, Megan," she said, her voice dripping with artificial honey. "You really should try the duck. It is exquisite." Evan sat across from me. He checked his watch 3 times in the first 10 minutes. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the velvet curtain that separated the dining room from the entrance. He was waiting for his cue. Then the curtain parted, and a young woman walked in. She was blonde, petite, and wore a coat that was slightly too big for her, designed to make her look fragile. This was Tessa Vale. I knew her name because I had spent the afternoon digging into her background, but to the rest of the room, she was a mystery. Evan stood up immediately, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Everyone," Evan said, his voice projecting just enough to silence the nearby tables. "There is someone I want you to meet. This is Tessa." He pulled out the chair next to him. Tessa sat down, keeping her eyes lowered, acting the part of the shy intruder. Marla beamed at her like she was the prodigal daughter. "Megan," Evan said, finally looking at me. His eyes were hard, devoid of the warmth I had fallen in love with. "We didn't want to ruin Christmas, but we cannot live a lie anymore. She is pregnant with my son." The sentence hung in the air. I saw the smirk twitch at the corner of Marla's mouth. Around the table, a few of Marla's friends, the witnesses they had invited, let out soft, cruel chuckles. It wasn't a shock to them. It was the punchline to a joke they had all been told in advance. Then came the papers. Marla reached into her oversized designer bag and slid a thick manila envelope across the pristine white tablecloth. It stopped inches from my water glass. "We want this to be civilized." "Megan," Marla said, her tone shifting from motherly to managerial. "Evan needs to focus on his family now. His real family. Sign the papers tonight. Let us handle the transition for you. It is the only dignified option you have left." I looked around the room. The waiter was refilling wine glasses. The couple at the next table was cutting into their steaks. Nobody cared that a woman was being executed in public. This was not a dinner. It was a kangaroo court, and the verdict had been decided before the appetizers arrived. I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady. I picked up my clutch. "I will not sign anything tonight," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "and I will not stay for dessert. I will cover my own meal." I reached into my purse to grab my credit card. I wanted to throw a $100 bill on the table and walk out with my head high. Evan laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "You can't," he said, leaning back in his chair with a look of absolute triumph. "I had the bank freeze the joint accounts this afternoon. Fraud protection trigger. You don't have a dime to your name. Megan, sit down." My hand froze inside my bag. My fingers brushed past the smooth plastic of my credit card and touched something cold and metal. It was a heavy, tarnished coin, slightly larger than a quarter. It was the founder's token, my foster mother. A woman who had saved me from the worst years of my life had pressed into my palm the day she died. "Use it when you need to know who is real," she had whispered. I had carried it for 10 years as a good luck charm. I pulled it out, intending to find my cash. But my grip slipped. The heavy coin fell from my fingers. It hit the fine china plate with a sharp, ringing clarity that cut through the murmur of the restaurant. It bounced once and spun on the tablecloth, the old insignia flashing under the chandelier light before settling with a dull thud. The restaurant went quiet for a heartbeat. At the table directly to my left, a man in a charcoal suit had been reading a file while he ate alone. At the sound of the coin, his head snapped up. He didn't look annoyed. He looked terrified. He stared at the tarnished metal disc sitting among the silverware. Then his eyes locked onto mine. It was a look of instant, professional recognition. He stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "That token," the stranger said, his voice shaking slightly. "Where did you get that?" Marla looked confused. Evan looked annoyed that his scene was being interrupted, but I just looked at the man, and for the first time that night, I realized the script had just changed. The man in the charcoal suit did not wait for an invitation. He stepped around the table, ignoring Evan's indignation, and picked up the tarnished coin with a handkerchief drawn from his pocket. He held it up to the light, inspecting the worn edges with the precision of a jeweler. "My name is Reed Halston," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur that only I could hear. "I serve as the chief risk officer for a private family trust, and this is a Caldwell Steward key. I have not seen one in circulation for 20 years. Evan stood up, his face flushing red. "Give that back. That is my wife's property. And since her accounts are frozen, it is effectively under my management." Reed turned to look at Evan. It was a look of profound boredom, the kind a lion might give a buzzing fly. He did not answer. Instead, he raised a hand to the restaurant manager, who had been hovering anxiously near the wine station. "Henri," Reed said, "please prepare the verification suite. We have a code gray activation." The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The manager, a man who had looked at me with polite disdain only minutes earlier, went pale. He actually bowed, and snapped his fingers at 2 servers. Immediately, "Mr. Halston," Henri said. "Madame, if you would please follow us." "She is not going anywhere," Marla snapped, her voice shrill. She reached out to grab my arm, but Reed stepped between us. He didn't touch her. He just occupied the space with such authority that she recoiled. "This is a private matter of the trust," Reed said. "You will wait here." I followed Reed and Henri through the kitchen, past the startled chefs, to a heavy oak door at the back of the building. It opened into a small, soundproof office lined with monitors. Henri gestured for me to sit. He placed the token on a glass pad on the desk. A scanner light swept over it. "I must ask you 2 questions." "Madame," Henri said, his hands trembling slightly. "These are security questions set by the original grantor. Only the true ward would know the answers." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Ask them." "First," Henri said, reading from a screen I couldn't see. "In the cabin where you lived with your guardian, Mrs. Gable, there was a loose floorboard in the pantry. What was hidden underneath it? I closed my eyes. I was back in that drafty cabin in the woods, smelling the cedar and the wood smoke. A tin box," I whispered, "filled with recipe cards and dried blue jay feathers." The screen beeped. "Green light." "Second question," Henri continued. What was the rule for the front porch light? It was never turned off, I said, my voice steadying, because she said the way home should always be visible, even in the storm. The monitors on the wall suddenly blazed to life. A logo appeared, a stylized hawk holding a key, followed by the words, "The Caldwell Heritage Fund. Status active." Reed Halston nodded, a small, satisfied smile touching his lips. "Welcome back, Ms. Caldwell. I don't understand," I said, looking from the screen to Reed. "Mrs. Gable. She was a foster parent. We were poor. We lived on government checks. Mrs. Gable was the custodian of the Caldwell fortune, hiding in plain sight to protect you from the very people currently eating your dinner outside," Reed said. He tapped the desk. "This token is not for buying things. Megan, it is an encryption key. It opens the archives. It grants access to assets, contracts, and the fraud alerts that have been piling up in our system waiting for a verify-in." He pointed to a map on the screen. A red dot pulsed right where we were sitting. "You see this building?" Reed asked. "The Golden Pheasant. The land it sits on, the lease they pay every month. It all goes to the Caldwell Heritage Fund. You are not a guest here, Megan. You are the landlord. You are the final beneficiary." I stared at the screen. The numbers were staggering, but what chilled me was the realization of the timeline. The fund had been dormant, waiting for me to present the token voluntarily. Mrs. Gable wanted me to live a normal life, to find my own way, before the weight of this legacy crashed down on me. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against the heavy oak door. Then another. "Megan, open this door right now." It was Marla. She was shouting, but through the soundproofing, her voice sounded thin and distant. For the first time since I met her, she sounded powerless. "She knew," I said, the realization settling in my gut like ice. The stewardship clause in the prenup. The rush to get me to sign the divorce papers with the waiver. They didn't just want Evan's freedom. They knew about the fund. They were trying to trick me into signing over control of this. Reed nodded. "They were trying to steal your identity before you even knew you had one." I looked at the door where Marla was pounding. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a judge passing a sentence. "Open the files. Read." I said, "I want to see exactly what they have been trying to touch." By 3 a.m, Marla had weaponized the internet. I sat in the secure suite of a hotel arranged by the trust, watching the notifications roll in on my laptop. She had posted a long, tearful entry on a popular local society blog, titled, "Watching a Mind Unravel a Mother's Heartbreak." In it, she painted me as a woman suffering from a psychotic break, a gold digger who had invented a fantasy world of hidden wealth to cope with her husband's justified departure. She claimed I was being manipulated by a predatory lawyer named Reed Halston. It was a masterclass in narrative control. My phone rang at 8:15 the next morning. It was the chief ethics officer at Grey Ridge. "Megan, I am putting you on immediate administrative leave," he said, his voice cold and clipped. "We found logs showing you downloaded proprietary client data related to Rourke Freight onto a personal drive. That constitutes data theft and a breach of our non-disclosure agreements." "That is not theft," I said, gripping the phone. "That is evidence of fraud committed against me using company resources." "Save it for legal," he said, and the line went dead. They had turned my investigation into my indictment. I looked at Reed, who was sitting across the room with 3 phones spread out before him. "They are moving fast," Reed said. "I have already issued preservation letters to Grey Ridge, the bank, and the telecommunications provider. If they delete a single kilobyte of those logs to frame you, they go to prison for spoliation of evidence. We are locking the crime scene down." Then the notification popped up on the legal alert system Reed had set up. "New filing probate court. Petitioner Marla Rourke. Subject emergency temporary guardianship." I felt the air leave my lungs. They were arguing that my claim to the Caldwell Heritage Fund was a symptom of mental instability caused by the shock of the affair. Marla was asking the court to freeze the fund and appoint her as my guardian to protect me from my own delusions. It was the nuclear option. If a judge believed her, even for a day, she would have legal control over every dime of the inheritance I had just unlocked. A soft chime from my personal email drew my attention. It was from Evan. The subject line was just, "Please read, Megan. I am so sorry. I was forced to do this. Mom said she would cut me off if I didn't go along with the plan. I miss you. Please come home so we can talk." I hovered my mouse over the timestamp. He had sent it exactly 2 minutes after the guardianship filing hit the court docket. This was not an apology. It was evidence to show the judge that he was the concerned husband reaching out to his sick wife. Then a text message arrived from an unknown number. "Please meet me. I am scared. I did not know they were going to do this to you. I was just hired for a role." It was Tessa. I did not reply immediately. I waited an hour, then sent coordinates for a coffee shop in a busy shopping district. I taped a slim digital recorder to the underside of the table before she arrived. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the confident mistress from the restaurant. She wore a hoodie and no makeup, her eyes red-rimmed. "I am an actress," Tessa whispered, staring into her latte. "Marla found my profile on a casting site. The gig paid $5,000. The script was, 'Be the other woman, be pregnant, create a crisis.' So there is no baby?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "No," Tessa said, her voice shaking. "There is no baby. There is no affair. I met Evan 3 times for rehearsal. They told me you were cold, that you trapped him, that I was helping him get a fair divorce. But last night, the way they looked at you, that wasn't a divorce. That was a hit job." I leaned in. "Why the pregnancy story?" "Tessa, why specifically a son? The will," she said, tears spilling over. I heard Marla on the phone with her lawyer. The Rourke Family Trust has a clause about male heirs triggering a release of funds. They needed a son to unlock their own money, and they needed you to sign that waiver so they could claim your assets as family property before kicking you out. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The son was a key, just like my token. They were going to use a fake pregnancy to unlock their trust, and use the guardianship to steal mine. My phone buzzed again, then again. A flood of notifications lit up the screen. Alert credit score dropped 100 points. Alert payment overdue, 4th Street Warehouse. Alert commercial loan default notice. The financial avalanche Marla had promised in the kitchen had arrived. They were burying me in debt to prove I was incompetent, to bolster their guardianship claim. I looked at Tessa. "Are you willing to say that under oath I don't know," she stammered. "Marla said she would ruin me." "Marla is already ruined," I said, sliding a napkin across the table. "She just doesn't know it yet. But if you help me, I can make sure you aren't buried in the rubble with her." I stood up, the recorder still taping beneath the table. The debts were piling up, the court date was looming, and the world thought I was crazy. But I finally had the one thing Marla didn't account for. I had the actress who played the villain, and she was ready to flip the script. The fluorescent lights of the emergency hearing room buzzed with a low, headache-inducing hum. Marla sat at the petitioner's table dressed in a soft, cream-colored wool suit that screamed maternal concern. She dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, looking every inch the heartbroken mother trying to save her daughter-in-law from a mental collapse. Beside her, Evan wore a charcoal suit slightly too big for him, his shoulders hunched to project the image of a husband crushed by the weight of his wife's sudden insanity. Judge Holloway looked over her spectacles at me. "Mrs. Caldwell Rourke," the judge said, her voice tired. "The petitioner claims you are suffering from acute paranoia and financial delusion. Do you have a statement prepared to refute the request for emergency guardianship?" I stood up. I did not smooth my skirt. I did not look at Evan. I looked straight at the bench. Your Honor, I don't have a speech, I said, my voice cutting through the stale air. I have an audit. I signaled to Reed. He stepped forward and placed a single, thick binder on the judge's bench. At the same time, he connected his laptop to the courtroom projector. A timeline appeared on the screen, sharp and unforgiving. On December 12th, Reed began, his tone clinical. The respondent, Megan Caldwell, was at the Serenity Spa from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. We have the receipt and the affidavit from the spa manager confirming she had no access to electronic devices. Reed clicked a button. A document flashed up the guarantor addendum for the warehouse lease. Yet, Reed continued. At 2:30 that same afternoon, her digital signature was affixed to this commercial liability agreement. The IP address for that signature does not trace to the spa. It traces to the executive server of Rourke Freight. I saw Evan stiffen. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to the screen. Furthermore, I said, stepping in, the petitioners claim they need guardianship to manage my newfound assets because I am unstable. But if you look at Exhibit C, Your Honor, you will see a draft of the divorce settlement they presented to me 2 days ago. It contains a specific release clause for third-party stewardship. They knew about the Caldwell Heritage Fund before I even unlocked it. You cannot be a guardian for assets you are actively trying to embezzle. Marla stopped dabbing her eyes. The handkerchief crumpled in her fist. This is absurd, Marla stammered, though her voice lacked its usual steel. We were just trying to protect her future interests. Is that why you paid Blue Finch Advisory $30,000 last week? I asked. The room went deadly silent. Evan turned to look at his mother, genuine shock on his face. He didn't know about this part. Reed pulled up the corporate registry. Blue Finch Advisory appears to be a consulting firm. It paid for the dinner at the Golden Pheasant. It paid the retainer for Marla's lawyer. And, most notably, it is a shell company registered solely to Marla Rourke. And who else did Blue Finch pay? I asked, turning toward the courtroom doors. Please call Tessa Vale. When Tessa walked in, the color drained from Evan's face so fast he looked like a corpse. She took the stand, her hands shaking, but her voice was clear. Ms. Vale, I asked, are you pregnant with Evan Rourke's child? No, Tessa said quietly. I have never slept with him. Then why did you announce it at dinner I was hired? Tessa said, tears welling up. I was paid $5,000 by Blue Finch Advisory to play a role. The script said I had to claim I was pregnant with a son, Marla told me. She told me it was the only way to trigger a clause in their family trust while forcing Megan to sign the divorce papers out of humiliation. That is a lie, Evan shouted, jumping to his feet. He pointed a trembling finger at Tessa. She is twisting it. The payment was for consulting on the timeline. He stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. He had just admitted there was a payment. He had just admitted there was a timeline. Judge Halloway slowly took off her glasses. She looked from the trembling actress to the shell-shocked husband, and finally to Marla, who was staring straight ahead with the dead eyes of a shark that had just hit the glass of its tank. Mr. Rourke, the judge said, her voice dangerously low. Sit down. She turned to the court reporter. Let the record show that the testimony regarding the pregnancy has been impeached. The petition for emergency guardianship is denied with prejudice. The judge slammed her gavel, the sound cracking like a gunshot. I am issuing an immediate temporary restraining order against both Marla and Evan Rourke. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing, along with Mr. Halston's evidence regarding the digital signatures and the shell company, to the district attorney's office for review of potential fraud and perjury charges. You can't do this, Marla hissed, standing up. She is the one who is unstable. She is manipulating you. One more word, Mrs. Rourke, and I will hold you in contempt. The judge snapped. Bailiff, escort them out. As the bailiff moved toward them, Evan looked at me. He looked small. He looked like the man I thought I had married, stripped of the lies. "Megan," he whispered. I turned and began packing my files into my briefcase with precise, steady movements. Marla brushed past me as the bailiff led her away. She leaned in close, ignoring the officer's hand on her arm. Her perfume, once smelling of expensive flowers, now smelled like desperation and sweat. "You think this is over," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You think you won because of a few logs I still have evidence on you. Megan, I know what you did in that cabin before you were 18, and I will burn you with it." I watched her walk away, her heels clicking on the linoleum. My hands paused on the latch of my briefcase. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. But for the first time that day, a chill that had nothing to do with the courtroom air slid down my spine. I did not open a bottle of champagne when we returned to the safe house. Victory in a preliminary hearing is not winning the war. It is just surviving the first volley. I knew Marla Rourke. She was not the type of woman to retreat to her corner and lick her wounds. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals do not negotiate. They attack. Reed sat at the dining table, his laptop screen glowing in the dim light. We were not planning a defense anymore. We were engineering a sting operation. "The Rourke Freight Charity Gala is tomorrow night," I said, looking at the invitation I had pulled from Evan's desk days ago. "It is their biggest night of the year. Donors, investors, press. If Marla is going to make a move to solve her liquidity crisis, she has to do it then." "Then let us give her an opportunity," Reed said, typing rapidly. "We will leak a digital whisper. A notification that the Caldwell Heritage Fund is preparing a transfer of $10 million to a holding account for reassessment at midnight tomorrow. We will make the transfer code accessible via the token she thinks she can override if she has the right proxy. We were not just baiting a hook, we were chumming the water. By noon, we had authorization from the State Financial Crimes Division. They had been watching Rourke Freight for months, suspecting tax evasion, but they lacked the hard evidence of active wire fraud. We were about to hand it to them on a silver platter. My phone rang in the late afternoon. It was Evan. I almost didn't answer, but the investigator sitting in the corner gave me a thumbs up. I pressed record and put the phone to my ear. Megan Evans' voice was wet and thick, like he had been crying for hours. "Please, you have to help me. Mom is losing her mind. She is talking about liquidating assets I didn't even know we had." "I can't help you, Evan," I said, keeping my voice soft, the concerned wife mask slipping back into place. "I don't understand how this happened. How did you even get my token? I thought I lost it. I took it." Evan sobbed, the confession tumbling out of him. "That day with the lawnmower, I slid it off your keyring. Mom said we needed it to clone the access signal. She said if we didn't get the trust money, the warehouse debt would bury us. I didn't want to hurt you, Megan. I just wanted the pressure to stop, and the pregnancy I asked. Was that Marla too?" "It was a script," he whispered. "She wrote it out on a legal pad. She said if you thought I had a son coming, you would sign the waiver to save your dignity. I am so sorry. I never touched Tessa. Please, tell the judge I cooperated." I ended the call. The investigator took the recording file with a grim nod. That was the nail in the coffin for Evan. But Marla was still thrashing. An hour later, a video surfaced on social media. It was a clip from the restaurant, edited to make me look deranged. It showed me standing up, knocking over the chair, and screaming. But there was no sound, just a caption. The unstable outbursts of a woman needing help. Reed didn't even blink. He contacted the trust's security team. Within 20 minutes, we released the raw, unedited footage from the restaurant's security cameras. It showed the calm, quiet dining room, my composed demeanor, Marla's aggressive gripping of my arm, and the moment the token fell with a heavy, deliberate grace. The internet comment section turned against Marla instantly. She had tried to manipulate the narrative, but she forgot that the venue belonged to me. Then came the final piece. Tessa forwarded me a PDF. It was a scanned copy of her performance contract. At the bottom, in jagged, aggressive ink, was Marla Rourke's signature. I spent the rest of the evening cross-referencing the warehouse address Marla had mentioned with the Rourke freight logistics logs. It wasn't just debt. I found a pattern of ghost shipments trucks that were logged as full of cargo, but weighed nothing at the weigh stations. They were billing clients for shipping air and using the invoices to secure loans. It was a classic Ponzi scheme built on diesel fuel and lies. I stood by the window, looking out at the snow falling on the city. In the corner of the room, a small, sad artificial Christmas tree sat on the dresser. They had chosen Christmas to destroy me because they thought I would be too sentimental to fight back. They thought the holidays made me weak. "Are you ready?" Reed asked, closing his laptop. I turned away from the window. "They wanted a show," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "So, tomorrow night, we are going to give them a finale. When they step onto that stage to ask for donations, we are going to turn the lights out." The Rourke Freight Charity Gala was a spectacle of desperate glamour. Marla stood at the top of the grand staircase wearing emerald silk, looking every inch the benevolent queen holding court. Evan stood beside her in a tuxedo, smiling with the easy confidence of a man who believed his problems had been solved by a judge's gavel and a few well-placed lies. They clinked glasses with investors, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, secure in the belief that I was somewhere in a motel room, crying over my frozen bank accounts. I did not enter quietly, but I did not make a scene. I walked through the double doors wearing a tailored charcoal suit, the kind I wore when I had to tell a CEO that his company was non-compliant. I wore no jewelry, no makeup to hide the fatigue of the last few days. I looked exactly like what I was a forensic auditor coming to close the books. When I stopped in the center of the room, people turned. I was a gray smudge on their colorful canvas, and my presence made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. Reed was standing by the bar. He tapped his earpiece and gave me a single sharp nod. The trap had snapped shut. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marla had used the compromised proxy access we had leaked to attempt a transfer of $5 million from the fake trust account. She had taken the bait, and in doing so, she had authorized a wire fraud transaction on a monitored federal server. The band stopped playing mid-note. The side doors flew open, and a team of agents in windbreakers marked with yellow letters stormed the room. The sound of heavy boots on marble silenced the chatter instantly. A lead investigator stepped onto the stage, pulling the microphone from the stunned singer. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a federal raid," he announced, his voice booming. "Please step away from your devices. Marla Rourke, Evan Rourke, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." The room erupted in gasps. Evan saw me standing near the shrimp tower. Panic took over his features, stripping away the handsome mask. He rushed toward me, his hands reaching out as if I were a life raft. "Megan," he shouted, ignoring the agents closing in. "Megan, tell them it is a misunderstanding. We are a team. You have to help me." I took a deliberate step back. I let the cameras of the local press, who had been invited to cover the gala, capture the distance between us. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. "I am not your team. Evan, I am the victim who kept the receipts." Marla was screaming near the staircase. She was being boxed in by 2 agents, but she pointed a manicured finger at me with venomous conviction. "She is the criminal," Marla shrieked. "I have the files. I have proof she embezzled from her previous job, arrest." Her Reed stepped forward, holding a tablet up for the nearest camera. "Actually, Mrs. Rourke," Reed said calmly. "The metadata on those files shows they were created on your personal laptop 48 hours ago. You did not find evidence of a crime. You manufactured it. And since you uploaded it across state lines, that is another federal count added to the pile." An agent grabbed Marla's wrists and clicked the handcuffs into place. She held her chin high, trying to smile like a martyr for the crowd. She thought she could still spin this. Then the agent leaned in close to her ear, but his voice was loud enough for the front row to hear. "We have the wiretap recording of your son." "Ma'am," the agent said. He confessed to the fake pregnancy scheme and the theft of the security token. "He gave us everything." Marla's face shattered. The smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, animalistic horror. She looked at Evan, who was being shoved against a wall by another officer. He was weeping, his tuxedo crumpled, broken by the weight of his own betrayal. The imaginary son he claimed to have was the weapon he used to destroy me, and now it was the evidence that would lock him away. I watched them be led out through the very doors they had walked in as royalty. The guests stood frozen, holding their champagne glasses, unsure if they were witnessing a tragedy or a farce. I turned and walked out the front entrance into the biting winter air. It was snowing, big, soft flakes that muffled the sound of the sirens. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old, tarnished token. I slid it into my wallet, right next to my library card. I did not feel rich. I did not feel powerful. I just felt clean. I had won, not because I had a trust fund, but because I had stayed awake when they wanted me to sleep. They had chosen the wrong victim. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to Mia Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.